Welcome back to Z-Speed and thanks for tuning back in. Today we'll be changing out the crankshaft and the camshaft position sensor B with the aid of a broomstick. So if you're interested in learning how to do it the easy way, just stay tuned. So if you own a Nissan 350z, by now I'm pretty sure you've already had to change out camshaft position sensor A or B. And if you haven't, you're in luck because I'm going to show you an easy way to get access to these. But the main problem when changing these two sensors out is a lack of clearance. You can see it's pretty tight. There's not a lot of light involved in here because of the way the hood's kind of hanging over you. So it just makes it super difficult to get in here and get access to these sensors. But I came up with a little idea. So I came up with this idea while I was working on my 10th Gen Civic Si. If you've ever worked on the 10th Gen Civic, you'll know once you put the hood up, there's two different positions for the hood stand. This one right here, which allows you access to check all of your fluids when you're at the gas station. You know, you check your oil, your coolant and everything. And then there's a secondary hood stand position right here that really opens up the engine bay. So if you go to the second position, you can see the hood really goes up really high and allows a lot more light in here and easy access for your whole head and body to get in here and do about anything you want to underneath the hood here. So I was thinking, well, hey, this is a great idea that Honda came up with. Why wouldn't it apply to the Nissan 350Z? Why don't we just make our own little way to open our hood up even higher? So that's how I came up with the broomstick idea. So your standard size broomstick should be just about perfect for you. The only thing you need to do is make sure that you don't damage the hood hinges. So go over and visualize your hood hinges to make sure you're not going too far when you go to prop up your hood here. And there's a couple different places you could place this broomstick. Just pay attention to where I'm placing mine right there. And now you can see that I've got it wedged in there pretty easy. And it really gives me a lot more room. Now you can see I can get my head in here and get access to this camshaft position sensor B really easily. So let's go over some of the signs and symptoms of a bad camshaft position sensor A or B. Doesn't matter whether this is an automatic or a manual, you'll still have these same lights pop up when you're just sitting in your driveway or you start your car up. Sometimes you'll just automatically get a traction control, slip, and service engine soon light on your dashboard. For no reason at all. And then you can see I'm trying to turn my traction control button off and nothing happens. It's just stuck on the on position. That's a clue that you might have a problem with your camshaft position sensors A or B. So once you get dashboard lights going off like that, you want to go ahead and scan your car with an OBD2 scanner. I'm going to go ahead and scan mine, and if you don't have one of these, you can pick one up pretty cheap on Amazon or go by your local auto parts store and they'll scan it for free for you. But this is a scan I did earlier on my camshaft position sensor A when it failed, and I'll link this video below on how to change this one out. But today we'll be changing B out. But you can see it tells you right away that you've got a problem, so you don't have a lot of guesswork here. You can go ahead and purchase your sensor and get ready to replace it. So let's talk about signs and symptoms of a bad crankshaft position sensor. You can see here I'm racing a 370Z and I had a total hiccup. I'm going to call it a hiccup where my engine cut off and then cut back on. Much worse than a misfire because you lose all your power and then your car almost kind of restarts. That is one of the signs and symptoms that you'll run into. Another one is if you're on a run to the store, let's say, you park your car's nice and warm, you come out and it will not crank up, but after it cools off, it will start again after about 5 or 10 minutes of cooling. If you put the hood up, that is another sign that your crankshaft position sensor is starting to fail. So if you're experiencing any problems like that, go ahead and get your OBD2 scanner out again. Go ahead and run a scan, and mine came up right away, and it should come up as crankshaft position sensor A if that's starting to fail. So before we get started, I'm just going to show you a little closer view of where I put the broomstick ends right up here by the hood latch. You can see I put some tape around it so it wouldn't scratch anything, and then I rested the other end on top of the fan shroud. I had no issues with slippage or movement while I was replacing the sensor, so that's a good spot. We're going to come right down in here. I'm going to show you where we're going to be heading to visualize the sensor. It's right down in here. You're going to want to remove this vacuum line right here because it kind of messes up your view of the sensor. So we'll remove that tube. But see that little green tab down there? That's the little button you're going to be pushing in to release the harness from the back of sensor B. These things can be baked onto your camshaft position sensor, so it may take a little struggle to get these things to break loose. I've already released mine once when I did a valve cover job, so it came off really easy this time. But on sensor A, I had some issues getting that one loose. This little vacuum line sensor right here is only held on by one 10mm bolt. You can remove that and then pull the vacuum line off, and that'll just give you a lot better access to get your arm in there. It just has one harness attached to it. You can see right here, it comes out really easy. So I just push the tab in and it slid it right out. Now I can get that out of the way, and now we have a lot of room to get our arm down in here and work with the camshaft position sensor B. You're really going to need that room to push down that button. It may be a little difficult, like we talked about earlier, to get that thing to depress. So let's talk about the sensor itself. You really want to use Hitachi sensors. That's what came stock with your 350Z. Here's the number. I got this one from Z1 Motorsports, or you can get them from Nissan dealer itself. It's a little more expensive from Nissan. I would recommend Z1 Motorsports. I'll leave a link below. But these are the newer improved sensors with a metal sheath around the end of the OEM. Sensors have a plastic sheath. I don't know if that makes a big difference, but they reworked these and they're supposed to last a little bit longer. Mine have lasted quite a long time, so I'm not going to complain. But yeah, you really want to go with the OEM Hitachi sensor. I've used aftermarket sensors before on camshaft position sensor A, and they were a complete failure. They didn't last very long, or they wouldn't even start at all. So I would recommend that you spend the extra money and get a real Hitachi sensor for your 350Z. These engines don't like the aftermarket sensors at all. Just go with the original equipment here. Okay, let's dive down in here and take a look at the harness that we're going to release from the camshaft position sensor. There's a green button or tab, let's call it a button, that you're going to push down and it will release the harness from the back of the sensor. And I don't have a really good shot here. I'm going to kind of adjust my angle. There's the 10mm bolt holding the sensor in. That's a good shot of that. But there's the button right there. Now you're going to push from the top down. It should click once it gets into this position right here. Now, if you can't get it to push down with your finger, you can use a small flathead screwdriver to help you push this button downward until it gets into this position right here. Once you hear it click, that means it's now detached from the sensor itself. Now, I did have an issue when I did my other sensor, and I had a hard time depressing this button down. It took me forever. Sometimes the heat can really just bake that thing in the locked position, so you really have to work with it. You obviously don't want to damage it or destroy it, so you want to take your time and just work on it. Spray it with some 303 aerospace protectant maybe, and work it a little bit with your finger, and hopefully you'll get it to depress. You can see now I slid it off of my camshaft position sensor, and now we can go ahead and break that 10mm bolt loose, so we can now remove the sensor. This is another harness that's attached to the same line that's attached to your camshaft position sensor. But yeah, now it's attached, and we can go ahead and remove the 10mm bolt from the sensor itself. So this is the easy part for you. Just grab a 1/4-inch ratchet, and I've got a 10mm extended socket, but you don't have to use an extended socket. And I was able to just break it loose really easily. And now I'm just gonna go in there and hand spin it out because it's not in there with a lot of torque at all. And I was able to easily just back this bolt out. Just be careful not to drop it in the engine bay, of course. And so I'm gonna go ahead and pull it on out. There it is right there. Put it somewhere safe. And now we're ready to go ahead and break the sensor loose. Now this sensor may, again, as well as the harness was kind of baked into the sensor, this sensor might be kind of baked into the back side of the valve cover. So you may have to rotate it counterclockwise and jiggle it a little bit. And that's what I had to do to get it to break loose, but not too much effort involved, a little bit of jiggling, and out comes the old camshaft position sensor B. And like we talked about earlier, this older style sensor has a plastic sheath around the end of it here. So you can see our newer and improved one, it has a metal sheath around the end. And that's a nice improvement by Nissan. Hopefully this sensor will last a lot longer. So there should be like a little bit of oil coating this, and that's normal. But what we're looking at here now is to make sure that the mounts are the exact same angle and they look to be exactly the same. So that's perfect. Everything should fit perfect back into your vehicle. And on the back side of this sensor, there's a little plastic tab that sticks out. We're going to show you that right now. Right there, that's what's going to attach to your camshaft position harness. And both of these sensors had the exact same little plastic tab on the back, so we should have no problems at all when we go to connect the harness to this brand new sensor. Now you see I have the brand new sensor and we're ready to place it back into position back here. I think the only little trick that might aid you here is to first visualize the hole that it's going to go back into. So kind of stick your head in there, look down in there and see if you can visualize it. Then you'll have a good idea of exactly where you're going to be placing the sensor, because you're not going to be able to really look at it as well. Once you grab it and put it in by hand, you're not going to be able to get your head in there while your arm's stuck back there. So once you have a good idea where it's supposed to go, you should be able to easily place it back in there, and it slides in a lot easier than it came out. So I was happy about that. Now we're just going to hand thread that little 10mm bolt in, and then we can snug it up. Now, I don't have any torque specs for you with this bolt, but there is a brass ring that's seated inside the plastic housing of the sensor where the bolt hole goes through. So you should be able to torque this thing down pretty good. That bolt is also an extended 10mm bolt, so you'll have a lot of thread to play with. So just make sure it's nice and snug. Last thing you want is that thing breaking loose while you're driving. That could cause you some problems. Now, when it comes to placing the harness back on to the sensor itself, you want to go ahead and just grab that harness and push it down over the back of the sensor until it kind of starts to get tight. Once you get to that point, you're going to want to place your hand around the entire harness and sensor itself, and then just squeeze down. At the very end, you should hear it click. If you don't hear it click, it's not seated correctly. I'm going to leave you a clip of what mine sounded like. There it goes, it snapped. I don't know if you heard that. It's got to snap. Okay, now we can go ahead and grab the vacuum line that we removed earlier, place it back on the back of the plenum, and then we can attach the little bracket that we removed earlier that's held on by that one 10mm bolt. So this is the easy part. We're pretty much done now with the camshaft position sensor B, and we can switch over to the crankshaft position sensor, which is even easier. So that's a nice little bonus. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and show you the part number for your crankshaft position sensor. I purchased this through Z1 Motorsports, but you can see this is from Nissan itself. Like we talked about earlier, the 350Zs do not like aftermarket sensors whatsoever, and if you put an aftermarket sensor in, do it at your own risk. You're probably doomed for failure, unfortunately, because it'll probably fail much earlier than the original equipment does, if it even works at all. So the only difference with this one is does not have a metal sheath. This is the newer sensor. It looks like it's about the exact same as the old sensor, but this is a genuine part, so that's what we're looking for here. Okay, to gain access to the crankshaft position sensor, you will need to place your 350Z on ramps or jack stands. Obviously, ramps will be a little more convenient. If you have those, throw it on some ramps, and now we're ready to go. So I'm going to throw some cardboard down here on the asphalt so we can just slide underneath without getting scraped up. And the good news is you don't have to remove your undershroud or remove anything actually to gain access to your crankshaft position sensor. It's super easy access. This is the easiest sensor that you'll ever change out in your 350Z. So that's the good news. This is the most simple one possible. So what I'm going to do now is just give you some orientation by showing you my rack and pinion steering right here. It's very close to the rack and pinion steering. So here is the rack and pinion steering. And then if you just look right here, here is your crankshaft position sensor. You can see where the harness attaches to the sensor. You can see the 10mm bolt holding the sensor in. So we're just going to break that bolt loose, detach the harness off the back of the sensor, and we can slide it right out. So easy, man. Finally something easy to do on the 350Z. So next up, we're going to use a 10mm socket with an extension here to get access to this 10mm bolt. Very easy to remove. It shouldn't have too much torque on it. I've removed this sensor before when I did my transmission swap, so mine was probably going to be a little bit easier here than yours. If you've never removed it, it may be a little sticky. It may take you a second to break it loose, but there's not a lot of torque involved here. So at this point, I've decided to go ahead and remove the sensor while the harness is still attached. Now you can, if you want to, remove the harness first. I just think it's a little bit easier to detach the harness from the sensor once you've removed the sensor out of the transmission bell housing area. I think it's easier because you can get both your hands, one to depress the tab while you're pulling the sensor. So I'm depressing the tab right here with one hand and pulling the sensor with the other. I just think it's a little bit easier to do it that way. You decide, but just be careful when you depress that little button right there because it is plastic. It may be brittle. You don't want to snap it off or break it, anything like that. So now we're ready to attach our new one. So once you place your crankshaft position sensor back into the harness, it's going to be exactly like the camshaft position sensor at the very end. You want to hear this thing click once you depress it completely in. So if it doesn't click, it's not connected properly and you're not going to be able to start your engine probably. So make sure you hear that clicking noise, and then you'll know that it's attached correctly. If you're not sure, you just tug on it a little bit, it shouldn't come loose. So now we can go ahead and place it back into the bell housing and place the 10mm bolt back in and torque it down. I don't have torque specs for this one either. Like we said earlier with the crankshaft position sensor, you just want to make sure it's nice and snug. The last thing you want to do is to have this bolt loosen up on you and then have your sensor come loose while you're driving. Your engine will die immediately and then you'll have no power to your power steering or anything. That's never good. So make sure it's nice and snug, but don't go crazy and break the sensor or anything. And now you're all done. That was the easiest sensor I've ever removed. I hope this video gives you the confidence to change out your own crankshaft and camshaft position sensor and save a boatload of money. And if it did, just give me a big old fat thumbs up, and until next time, you know what to do. Just keep on repairing.